A warm greetings to the students of MSc second semester. Today's topic of lecture is Columbia Suicide Severity Scale. This is a report that was laid out by the World Health Organization in 2019, where it said that close to 8 lakh people die due to suicide every year. And a single most important risk factor for suicide is a previous suicide attempt that a person has tried. Suicide is the third leading cause of death amongst 15 to 19-year-olds. 79% of the global suicides occurs in low and middle income countries. And ingestion of pesticide, hanging, and firearms are the most common methods of suicide that has been noticed globally. Who is at risk? And I would say this that anyone could be at risk from suicide. The link between suicide and mental health disorders is well established in high income countries. Many suicides also can happen impulsively in moments of crisis. What can be these crises? It could be a crisis of financial, it could be a relationship crisis, a chronic pain, or a chronic illness. So they are saying the report says that anyone could be at the risk of suicide. It is not just someone who is experiencing mood destability over a period of months. It could be in any moment of crisis. We as psychologists have to be the gatekeepers of the community, looking after them, noticing the signs, and providing the early intervention at the earliest. In addition to this, experiencing a conflict, a disaster, a war, a violence, abuse, loss, sense of isolation have all been very strongly associated with suicidal behavior. Suicide rates are also high amongst the marginalized and vulnerable groups, such as the LGBTQIA plus community, prisoners, indigenous people, refugees, etc. The methods of suicide has been seen that they can try to attempt suicide through pesticides, self-poisoning. Other methods are through hanging and firearms. Knowledge of the most commonly used suicide method is very important to devise the prevention strategies that has been shown to be effective, such as restriction of the access to the means of suicide. Many countries have put a ban on the use of firearms without a proper license. So that definitely has brought down the rates of suicide in such countries. Prevention and control, and I put this in very big words, is that unlike the myth, unlike the stigma that one cannot prevent suicide, I will say, psychologists will say, researchers will say, people will say that suicides are preventable, 100% preventable. And there are a number of ways that can be taken at the population, subpopulation, and individual levels to prevent suicide and suicide attempts, which include reducing access to the means of suicide, which we have just discussed shortly, then reporting by media in a very responsible way. So if you have the means to access the media about a person who is going through any kind of psychiatric disorder, never disclose the name identity of the person, because this ensures that you're breaching confidentiality into the private lives of these people. Always ensure that the content displayed in media is in sourced in in ethical manner without causing a psychological and physical harm to the person about whom the news is being reported. Third is school-based interventions. Here, the teachers play a very primary role in monitoring the mental health of the children. If the child is playing as he or she previously has been playing, how different uh, the child's behavior is in the previous month in comparison to this month. What are the psychosocial problems being faced by the child at home? Then the fourth intervention is introducing alcohol policies to reduce the harmful use of alcohol. Early identification and treatment in taking care of people with mental and substance use disorders, chronic pain, chronic illness, acute emotional distress. Also, we have to train even the non-specialized health workers in the assessment and management of suicidal behaviors so that even they can become the gatekeepers to for the people between the people who are attempting suicide and the mental health caregivers. So, training such non specialized health workers can be a most effective way of preventing suicide. And also, a follow up care for the people who attempt suicide and provision of community support is very important. Suicide is a very complex issue. It always has and always will be. That's why the efforts in prevention requires proper coordination and collaboration among multiple sectors of the society, such as health, education, agriculture, business, justice, law, defense, politics, media. Efforts has to be comprehensive, it has to be integrated, as no single approach alone will make an impact on an issue as complex as suicide. However, we can face some challenges when we are trying to implement um, interventions relating to suicide, stigma, and taboo. But we can play our part in raising the community awareness and breaking down the taboo. So, in order to prevent suicide, there is the taboo or stigma that people thinking of taking their own life or have attempted suicide are not seeking help. But this is not simply the case. Some suicides could be impulsive. They cannot have time to think about going to a caregiver to seek help. So we have to be very mindful of our relationships with people around us, friends. If you notice the early signs of suicide in the people, please refer them immediately to a caregiver or listen compassionately to the person going through those obstacles. It can make a huge difference. Then there are also the challenges of the data quality, that is, the availability and the quality of data on suicide and suicide attempts is still underreported. So we have to make sure that there are much more improved surveillance and monitoring of suicide and suicide attempts for effective suicide prevention policies. This is the vision of Sustainable Developmental Goal 2020 to reduce one-third premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention, treatment, and promoting mental health and well-being. So even this comes as a sustainable developmental goal by 2030. And in order to achieve such amount of mental health and well-being, prevention of suicide comes under its umbrella. Then we move to Columbia Suicide Severity Scale. Who constructed it? It was constructed by Posner et al. And one of some of the important guidelines of this test is it's intended to be used by individuals who have received proper training in its administration and not to be used by individuals without training. The questions contained in Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale requires certain probes, which is mentioned for each subsection in the scale. So, depending upon the subsection, if a particular yes is being reported by the clients, then you have to uh, immediately go to another section. So, all of these detailed instructions are laid down in the questionnaire. Ultimately, the determination of the presence of suicidal ideation or behavior would depend upon the judgment of the individual who is administering the scale. So, you would have to be, as a psychologist, very mindful of the behavioral expressions of the client the emotional, social, psychological concerns that are being reported by the client. Depending on that, you are to score this questionnaire. Then the administration of the test. So you have to take the important demographic information of the client, and instructions have to be given verbatim. So questions 1 to 2, if you see the instructions given in the manual, if if the answers to questions 1 and 2 are both negative, then you have to proceed to the suicidal behavioral section. But if the answer to the question 2 is yes, ask questions 3, 4, 5. If the answer to question 1 and 2 is yes, then complete the intensity of ideation section below. You would be able to have a more thorough understanding when you receive the questionnaire. So you can take a look at it and come back to this video. So when you're writing after the scoring and the results, you're writing the results and the interpretation, you have to include the client's demographic information, what the scale is, what it measures, the explanation of the scores obtained by the client and interpretation of it, triangulating the data gathered during the case history to understand the client's chief concerns better, recommendations for the treatment and prognosis. Who are also the people that you can refer the client to? You can put them down in the report. Conclusion is a short description of the scores the client has obtained and the interpretation of those scores. This is all for today's lecture. Thank you for listening patiently, intently. You can go to these references to find out more about the Columbia Suicide Severity Scale. Thank you. Have a good day.